You're watching The Legal Breakdown. All right, Glenn, the question I've gotten more than anything else so far in the immediate aftermath of Donald Trump's conviction here, can the Supreme Court eventually overturn this conviction that just happened in New York? So can you go over this? Can you go over the appeals process and where this case is going to live in terms of what court system?
You know, that's a big question, but I'm going to cut right to the chase. I don't want to bury the lead, Brian. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, can do whatever the Supreme Court damn well chooses to do. We have seen that, but that comes with a whole bunch of caveats. So let's go through them. This is a state case. This is not a federal case. Ordinarily, the federal courts play no role in state cases. States are their own sovereigns, right? They are completely separate from the federal government, free to run not only their government, but their judiciary, their criminal justice system as they see fit. So in the overwhelming majority of the state court prosecutions in all 50 states, those cases go up through the state court system. They will have typically two lines of appeal, an intermediate appeal court, and then a supreme state court. And that's the end of it. When a supreme state court says, no, we are not reversing this conviction, that is typically when it's over. And in, I would say, 99.5% of the cases, that's the way it plays out. This is a New York State court prosecution and conviction. So it will take some time to work its way through the state court system of appeals. However, there are instances where a state court case can literally jump into the federal court system. How does that happen? Let's use a concrete example. Remember that litigation in Colorado when Donald Trump was disqualified from being on the presidential ballot in Colorado? Why? Because they went through a trial in state court in Colorado, and the state court judge found that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection on January 6th. Donald Trump is and will forever remain an adjudicated insurrectionist. That case went up through the Colorado State Appeals Court system, and the Colorado Supreme Court affirmed that ruling, that he's an adjudicated insurrectionist. You would have thought case was over and done, right? Well, not so fast, because Donald Trump then succeeded in jumping into the federal court system, and he convinced the Supreme Court to take that case for review. So here is the point that people need to keep in mind. A state court case, once it has run its course through the appeals court in the state of conviction, that defendant can ask the Supreme Court, please, 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 take my case. And the Supreme Court almost never does. But if there is some issue of exceptional constitutional importance, and I mean federal constitution, not just the state constitutions, because each state has its own state constitution, and it doesn't necessarily track exactly with our federal constitution. If they can convince the Supreme Court that there is this extremely burning question that they should take up because there might have been some kind of a violation of one of the rights guaranteed in the federal constitution by virtue of the way the state courts handled Donald Trump's case, the Supreme Court, let's go back to where we started, can do whatever it damn well pleases. I don't believe there's any legitimate reason, legal, constitutional, factual, or otherwise, for the United States Supreme Court to accept this case for review. But with Alito and Thomas and Roberts and Gorsuch, who knows what they will do.
And can they take up this case just because they find issue with, for example, and we don't know the answer to this yet, but with the sentencing? So if they see that Donald Trump has been sentenced to a prison term, for example, could they then take this up solely to try and prohibit Donald Trump from being incarcerated?
I'm always going to start with they can do whatever they damn well please, because they've
Right.
proven themselves not to be honest brokers of the law or the Constitution, period. And I take no joy in saying that as somebody who has fought all his life to make sure we remain loyal to the Constitution. But I think to answer your question, it's a great one. With respect to sentencing, I don't think the Supreme Court could possibly come up with a federal constitutional reason to accept the case for review because they might subjectively disagree with the sentence Judge Merchan imposed. Really, the only time, in my opinion, the Supreme Court could take it up to review a sentencing determination would be if the sentence was illegal. In other words, if somehow Judge Merchan overstepped his judicial authority and punished Donald Trump more than or in ways other than the law allows, that could actually violate a number of federal constitutional provisions. But listen, we all know Judge Merchan is an experienced, thoughtful jurist. He's going to impose the sentence not only that he believes is right and just for Donald Trump, but one that is well within the laws of the state of New York.
But just to be clear now, whatever tortured rationale the Supreme Court might put forward ultimately does have to be accepted because there's no higher authority to rebuke them. Is that right?
You know, the answer is yes. There is no higher authority. Unless Donald Trump becomes president and is true to his word, becomes a dictator on day one, then he will be in a position, and again, this sounds like the stuff of Hollywood fiction, he would be in a position to disregard any ruling that came from the Supreme Court, and then we are in constitutional crisis territory, which has a very specific definition. We talk about being in a constitutional crisis all the time when Donald Trump abuses his power and authority. That's not a constitutional crisis. But if two branches of government collide and there is no tiebreaker in the law or under the Constitution, like the Supreme Court, which is the last stop under our constitutional construct, if a rogue president refuses to abide by a Supreme Court ruling or precedent, we are now in constitutional crisis territory because there's no one to break the tie. And then, unfortunately, he with the most military power will win.
I want to switch gears a little bit here. Donald Trump's attorneys and basically the rest of his mouthpieces seem, at least in the media, at least publicly, pretty confident about their chances on appeal. Do you buy that, or is this just desperate wish casting from the Trump folks?
Yeah, no, I don't want to turn this into a comedy bit, but you know what I think of when I hear Donald Trump's lawyers saying they have a good shot on appeal? I think to the movie Animal House, one of my favorites growing up, and what the dean said to the John Belushi character, Mr. Blutarsky. Mr. Blutarsky, your grade point average is 0.0. That is precisely Donald Trump's odds of winning on appeal.
Okay. Glenn, how long would the appeals process take? And I guess more importantly, would it have any impact on him serving out his sentence? So, for example, if he's sentenced to prison, which we'll find out on July 11th, would that prison sentence be put on hold if he appeals?
That is up to the discretion of Judge Merchan. That is a big ticket question. And I happen to believe, and I think we've talked about this yesterday and undoubtedly we'll talk about it again, I happen to believe that the prosecutors will request a period of incarceration based on these 34 felony convictions of Donald Trump, and I believe Judge Merchan will impose a period of incarceration, but that doesn't answer the question entirely because Judge Merchan will then have the opportunity to suspend that sentence. In other words, not force that sentence to begin running, put it on hold, put it on pause, while Donald Trump files an appeal. That ordinarily doesn't happen, but of course we did see a Trump-appointed judge in D.C., Judge Carl Nichols, do precisely that for Steve Bannon, which was entirely undeserved. So Judge Merchan could do that. But let's assume he doesn't, Brian. Let's assume he imposes a period of incarceration and he refuses to suspend it or pause it or stay it. Then Donald Trump will run to the New York